Guys, today we are going to create a social network using Flask and Python. By the end of this by the end of this video, you will know how to create a full stack social network, including a database, server, and your front end. And yeah, so let's get right to it. Thanks for watching. So first thing that you want to do is create your directory for your project. So we're going to call the directory net. So let's go ahead and create that now. We're going to say open up a terminal or command prompt and say mkdir net. Okay. Then we want to go ahead and change into that net. And it's going to be an empty folder at this point. Now what we want to do is say pip install. So assuming you have Python installed on your computer, you're going to have pip, which is the Python package manager. We're going to say pip install virtual env. Okay, so virtual env is a package that will allow us to create an environment where we can keep the specific versions of the Python packages that we are using for this project separate from the Python that is installed on our computer. Okay, we are doing this so we can keep track of those packages, and then if anyone wants to reproduce our project, they know exactly what packages they need to install. So once we have virtual env installed on our computer, we're going to say source. Actually we were going to say virtual env, and then we want to say the name of the Python version that we're going to use. So we're going to say -- Python equals Python 3.6, and then we want to specify the name of our directory. So we're going to say my-env. Okay, so now that's going to create that virtual environment for us. Again, this is where all our Python packages that we install are going to be saved to once we activate that. So the way we do that, again, we're still in the same directory. We say source myvenv bin activate. Oh, one sec, guys. Oh, my-env, there we go. Bin and activate. Okay, so now we are inside of our virtual environment. Now we can install our packages. So we are going to need one package in particular for this, which is Flask. So Flask is a Python web framework that makes it very easy to get a website up and running quickly. It allows us to create a basic server as well as render HTML to the page when our user comes to visit it. Okay, so let's go ahead here and say pip install Flask. So after our virtual environment has been activated, that is going to take that package and bring it into our virtual environment for us to use. So now let's go ahead here and now we want to create our database schema. Okay, so now we're going to dive into, we have our dev environment set up. We're going to dive into how to create the application itself. So the first step in doing this is creating the database schema. So in our case, we are only going to have one table, okay? And a table in a database is where you store all information, okay? Generally, you may have multiple tables. In our case, we're just going to have one, which is posts. So let's go ahead and create a file, and we're going to call it schema.sql. Okay, so this is where we are going to create the or specify the values that are going to be in our database table. Okay, so we're going to say in this case here, let's go ahead, let me open it up here. Okay, so we're going to say drop table if exists posts. All right, and then we want to say create table posts. So what this is doing is this is saying if that table exists already in the database, go ahead and drop it and then create a new one with the things that we are going to specify in just a minute here. Now, these things we're going to specify are unique values in our database. So first thing we want to do is create a unique identifier for every post. So we want to say ID, which is going to be the name of our column in our database table where that value is going to go. So every database table has columns that make up the values that relate to those entries into the database. Okay, so we want to say ID integer, and that is going to be the primary key, and that is going to auto increment. So this is a little bit of lingo here, guys. This is just SQL syntax for creating a primary key that auto increments. So what that means is this is the integer that is going to represent or reference the each individual post, and as each post is added into our database, you can think of it as you define the column values, and then each post you add is a new row in your table that is going to be a new entry into your database that corresponds with those column values at the top. So we have ID integer is a primary key, and that's going to auto increment. So that means for each new entry into our database, that is going to increase by 1. So now we want to create a name. So we're going to say name is going to be text. That means it's a text value, and it's going to be not null. So this is going to be for our entries. So now we're thinking for each post that comes into our social network, we want to be able to create we want to be able to post an entry into our database, right? And in this case, we want to know the name of the person that created it, and we want to have the content of the post. And that's what's going to be put into our database. So that is the first value. Name is text, not null. Next up here, we want to grab the content. So we're going to say content, text, not null. So what not null is doing is that's saying if we try to create an entry and that is a content or name is not specified, return an error, because we want name and content to be specified for every single entry in our database. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and just add our closing parenthesis, closing semicolon, and write and quit this. All right, so now we have our schema. Now we're going to use our schema.sql in order to generate our database file. So let's go ahead here and use SQLite 3. This is a very light version of a database you might have heard of called MySQL, and this comes built in with Python. So we're going to say SQLite 3, and then we want to put database.db, specifying the name of the database file. It can be anything .db, and then we're going to put a little less than sign, and then we want to put the schema.sql after that, okay? And by the way, guys, if you haven't used autocomplete before in the terminal, when you start typing the name of a file and click tab, it will go ahead and it will create the rest of that file name for you. So that's what I'm doing there to quickly generate that. So we say SQLite 3, database.db, less than sign, schema.sql, and click enter. So now when we click ls to see the files here, we see that there is a database.db file. All right, so now we created our schema, we created our database. Now we need to create the server, which is going to handle the interactions with the database. So to give you guys just a general overview of what the structure of a full stack application looks like, you have your front end, which is the view, okay? When you come to any website you see on the internet, you are seeing the front end of a website. That is the view, and the information that is being displayed on that most often comes from a database. So what is going on in between there? That would be the server. So we have the view, and the server receives requests for information from the user, which comes from the view, right? So the user comes to the view. From there, they're able to make certain requests to the server for information they want to see. Then the server goes, grabs that information out of the database, pulls it back, and then sends it to the user, which is viewing everything. So you can think of it in 3 parts. We have the view, we have the server, and we have the database, right? And the server is going to be the intermediary in between there, pulling information from the database, making the changes that we want to make before we send it back to the user who is viewing it, and then sends that information back to the front end to where the user is viewing it, okay? So right now we've created that final part. That's the database. So now let's go ahead here and create that intermediary part, which is going to be the server. So let's go ahead here and say we're going to open up the server, and that is going to be app.py. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we are opening up this file here. This is going to be our server file, okay? And generally speaking, you can name that app.py. That is sort of a good practice, okay? So let's go ahead here now and install the packages. Actually, let's go getting a little ahead of ourselves here. So let's install the packages. So we're gonna say pip install Flask, right? So that will we already installed that. Okay, so that's going to bring down that package for us. That's, again, how we're going to make our web framework. I'm going to move over out of the terminal for you guys, and we're going to open up and grab net, okay? So this is our file right here. And again, we have our app.py file, which is going to be where we are going to add the information for our server, okay? So the first thing that we are going to do here is we are going to import Flask. So we want to say from Flask import Flask. Let me go ahead and move myself down here. Import Flask, render template. This is going to be for displaying the HTML that we want to display on the screen. Then we're going to say also, let's see, what else do we need here? Flask, render template, we need request in order to grab the information that is going to be the content and the name of the user off the request that's coming in. And then we see, let's see here, Flask, render template, request. What else are we going to need? We are going to need redirect. No, I think we're good. I think that might be enough. Okay. So now we want to go ahead here, and we're going to say, we want to create our actual server object. So we're going to say app equals Flask, and then we go ahead and we pass name as the parameter here, okay? So that is going to create our server object, and it's called app. So now that we have that, we want to create the routes, okay? So when you have a server, you have different routes that you can hit. These are known as endpoints. Routes, basically synonymous, but essentially what they do are they are unique endpoints which tell the server, which the server uses to decide what data to send back to the view half, right, to the user, the view part of our full stack application. So in this case, say we wanted to log in a user, we would often hit an endpoint called something like login, and then that would run the necessary code on the server looking for the necessary information that was sent to the server in order to log in the user. So in our case here, we just want to be able to see a home page and then be able to create posts and see the posts that have been created. So let's go ahead here and let's say at app.route, and we're just going to do a backslash. So this is just going to be the very home page of our application once we start it up, which we will do here in just a second. So we're going to say at app.route with just the backslash. This could be anything like backslash home, backslash login, backslash whatever you guys want to put. You can specify whatever name. That's just going to be your endpoint you have to send the request to in order to receive that response back from the server. So now we're going to say, we want to say methods, right? So when you are sending information, whether you're sending information or any kind of information on the internet, we use things called methods. So in this case, the methods are going to be or include post, put, delete, and there's a few other ones as well. Get is obviously the most common one. So when you make a request to see any web page on the internet, that's a get request. You're saying, I want to get this information, and they send it back. Generally, that is going to be the web page, the initial web page, okay? Beside that, we have post, which is saying, here's some information, store it in the database. Put, which is saying, here's some information, you probably already have this in the database, update what you have, okay? And then finally, delete is, here's some information about what we want you to remove from your database, okay? Now, all of these methods, these put, post, delete, and get, these are all known as, this is what's known as CRUD, but as another acronym you may have heard of. But essentially, these are again how you send the data from the front end, and these are all user actions. So all these are just acronyms for user actions, okay? So let's go ahead here and say there's two methods that are allowed for this endpoint that is just going to show our page with the posts and be able to take in information. So we're going to say the methods are get in order to get the page and post, okay? So when the post is for submitting. All right, so now that we've got our app.route here, we're going to create a function that's going to execute when we hit this endpoint. So we're going to say def index. We're just going to call this function index. And then we're going to say, then we want to say if request.method equals get. Then in this case, we're just going to pass, okay? Because if it's a get request, we're going to go ahead and return the template that we want our user to see, right? Because they're requesting to see the web page. So we're going to say return render template, and we're going to create this in just a second. But for now, it's going to be called index.html, okay? We're going to create that HTML file that our user will see when they send an initial get request to our server in just a second here. So if request.method equals get, we want to pass. Now otherwise here, if request.method equals post, then we want to go ahead here and we want to grab the content. So if it's a post request, we are making the assumption that our user has already come to our page and they are now posting information to our web page via some input fields that they see on their end. Okay, so we want to say request.form.get, and we're going to name our inputs in just a second, but we're going to call them name. And we're going to say request.form.get, and then we're going to call the other one name, and we'll say post. Okay, just for this is going to be the value of whatever our user is, the actual information, the text that our user is posting. This is different from this post. Okay, this is the method itself, and then this is just a variable that's going to be part of that data that we receive that is going to contain the text. Okay, so we're going to have a name equals that, and post equals this. And then we're going to go ahead here, and now we're going to create that post and store it in our database. Okay, so we're going to call a method called create post, and we're going to pass in name and post. Okay, so now let's go ahead here and actually create the file that's going to interact with our database. Okay, so we created our database, and right now we're starting to create our server, which is going to handle requests, but now we need a way for our server to interact with our database, and we're going to create a thin layer that of functions that our server is going to use to add things to the database or remove things from the database. Okay, so let's go ahead here and create that file now. And we're going to call that file models.py. Okay, so in this file, we're going to say import SQLite 3. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead here and do some pathing. So essentially, guys, when we get to this file here, this is going to be the thin layer that is going to contain that information that is going to allow our server to interact with the database here. And in this case, we want to directly know where our database file is so we can open that up and interact with that. So we're going to say root equals path.dir name, and we're going to say path.relpath file. So again, essentially, this is saying get the directory name and then get the direct path to whatever file we pass in as the file for this. Okay, so we're going to use that in just a second. You guys will see how that ties in nicely. But we're going to go ahead here now and say create a function that's going to create a post. Okay, so when that request comes in, it's going to call this function with the name and the post data from that request, and then it's going to insert that into the database. So let's go ahead and say def create post, and remember it's going to receive two parameters, that is name and content. Okay, and now we want to go ahead and create a connection to our database. So we're going to say con equals sql.connect, and then we want to say path.join root, and then the name of our database file, so database.db. Okay, so now we've made a connection to our database. Now we're going to define a thing called a cursor. So essentially, guys, in order to efficiently pull data, or not pull data, but traverse the database and find the information that we need, we're going to use a thing called cursor. And what the cursor does is, instead of grabbing the whole database, it just goes to what we need and makes it much more efficient for us. Okay, so we're going to say cur equals con.cursor. Okay, so that's going to say this is the variable that represents the instrument or object that is going to move over our database and find the information we need. So now we're going to say cur.execute. So this is going to execute raw SQL syntax for inserting a post into the database. So we're going to say insert into posts, which is our table, name and content. So insert into the name and content columns, or let's roll back. Insert a row into the name and content columns that is going to contain this data that was passed as a parameter. Okay, so we're going to say insert into name content values question mark, and then we want to go ahead here and fill in those values, what those are going to be. So in this case, that is going to be name and content. All right, so that will execute that SQL statement after making a connection to our database, inserting in the name of the person who posted and the content of the post. Next up here, we're going to say con.commit and con.close. So that's going to commit that entry to the database, finalizing it, kind of writing it in stone, and then close the connection to the database. Now we want to create one more method in this file as well, which is get posts. So we want to say def get posts, and that's going to be that's actually not going to take any parameters. That's just going to pull all the posts that we want out of the database so we can display them on the HTML template that we allow our user to see. So we're going to say def get posts, and we're going to say con equals sql.connect path.join root and database.db, just like above there. And then we say cur equals con.cursor. And then we want to execute a little bit different SQL this time. So we're going to say cur.execute select all, which is represented by this little star, all from posts, which is the name of our table. So that's going to pull all the entries out of our table. And then we want to go ahead here and say posts equals cur.fetch all. So that will go ahead and store all those entries into our database that we pulled out with that last SQL statement and store them in the post variable. Then we want to go ahead and return posts. Okay? All right, so that will go ahead and do that. That will grab all our posts for us. So now we have that file. We're able to interact now with our database with that thin layer. We have our database written, and now we want to finish out our server here. So let's go ahead and check this out here. And now we're going to go ahead here and create a few final elements, okay? So this is going to be, we have our create post, and now we want to go ahead here and just say posts equals get posts, right? So that is going to go ahead and grab all of the posts using that method we just created in our models.py file here, grab all the posts out of the database and return them so that we can display them on the screen. So we have posts equals get posts, and then we want to go ahead and return, well, we have our render template right there, and then we're going to pass another parameter, and we're going to call it posts equals posts. So what this is doing here, when we create our template, which is what our user is going to see initially, and then every time they submit a post, we re-render that template, updating it to reflect any new posts. So in this case, we are creating a variable called posts, and we are passing in posts. So when that template wants to access what those posts are, it can do so by referencing this variable that we are passing into it right here. You can think of that more or less as a variable. Okay, so we've got that. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. That should be just about everything that we need here. Something else that we do want to do here is say from Flask cores import cores. Okay, so this is not always necessary, but these are security precautions that are going to allow our server to run properly here. So essentially, we're going to install this package in just a minute, but these are just security precautions to prevent certain things like cross-site scripting, which could say essentially that influences our SQL, could pretend. Well, okay, there's a couple different things that can happen there. One, someone could inject new SQL code into our application to see all the contents of our database, and we don't want that to happen. So that can help do things against, protect against that, and also cross-site scripting. In this case, we're not using any JavaScript specifically, so they can't like insert JavaScript into our code and kind of cheat it in. But there's other ways that you can cheat in other code and essentially execute certain things when users are trying to do something else, and generally those certain things would be devious things. So we're going to go ahead and close this out now. Okay. All right, so that's what we've got. Now, guys, let's check out. Yeah, we don't need to close it actually. So let's check out what we've got. We've got our server. We have our models.py file, which is the thin layer on top of the database to interact with the database. We have our database file. And then we have our schema that we wrote to generate our database. Okay, so now the final thing we have to do is create the HTML template that users are going to see when they initially come to the website. Okay, so let's go ahead now and create that. Oops. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that now. So this file is going to be, well, first we're going to store it in a directory. Flask always looks in a directory called templates for your templates to display to the user. So we're going to create a directory called templates in order to allow Flask to find that. And then inside this directory, we're going to create a file called index.html. Okay, now what this is going to do here is we are going to be able to display this to the user, and the user is then going to be able to see this HTML, and this is where we're going to show the posts and allow the user to submit new posts. So we're going to say doc type. Doc type is HTML, and then we want to say HTML, and then we want to put the body of our text. So again, guys, these are just regular old HTML tags here. And in the body here, we're going to create a form, and we're going to say form, and then action equals backslash here in between quotes. That means it will send whatever method we specify after we submit this form to that endpoint. And in that case, that is this endpoint right here. And now we want to say what request. So in this case, guys, we defined it so that if it's a post method, then we go ahead and we create these, pull this information, and then we create the post, right? We want that to happen. So we're going to say method equals post. And then we want to go ahead here and put that information in our form, okay? So let's go ahead and say in here, let's put input with a placeholder to let the user know what to put in there, and that's going to be name. And then we're going to say, after that, we're going to go ahead here and say name equals name. Okay, so this name field is going to specify what the name, so right here, remember we're looking for name, request.form.get name. These values right here that we're pulling are specified in our form by this name field right here, okay? So we've got that input. Now we want to create another input, and this input is going to be the content of the post. So we're going to say placeholder input. Placeholder equals post content, and then we're going to say name equals post. Okay. Now finally we have a final input, which is going to be our submit button. So we're going to say input type equals submit, value equals submit. All right, and then that will complete our form. So right here, this is the form that is going to be able to submit new posts to our application. Now we are going to go ahead here and create our, now we want to create our way to show the messages that are in our posts, right? So remember, we are passing this right here. Post equals post. We want to be able to see all the posts that are pulled out of the database every time we render this template, right? Because we want to see an updated view, including all the posts that have been recently submitted every time that we see this template. So let's go ahead here and do that now. So we're going to say, let's see. We're going to first create some special syntax here for rendering this Python, right? So this is why this is a special template. This is unique to Python templating for HTML, specific with Flask. So we're going to say for post in posts. So essentially we can write raw Python in our HTML template in order to render things. This is pretty cool, guys. So check this out. We say for post in post, then we want to return a div, and we're going to say in that div, we're just going to have a post 1 plus a colon and post 2, okay? So remember, in our database field here, in our schema, we have our ID, we have our text, and we have our content, okay? So in this case here, when we get all these posts out of the database, it is returning a set for us, which is going to have those three values. So again, the first one will be the ID at the 0 index, second one will be the name at the first index, and third one will be the content at the second index. So we want to go ahead and reference that in our index.html file here with that. And now these two squiggly brackets right here just mean we are writing Python, okay? So anytime you're doing like loops or if statements, you're going to go ahead and use this. And then anytime you're rendering actual Python onto the screen, you're going to do that with these two consecutive squiggly brackets with the information between. Okay, so now let's go ahead and close out that div. And now we can go ahead here and we will need to end this for statement. So again, this is specific to Flask and Python, generally speaking, Python templating for HTML. So we want to go ahead and end that loop with the end for here. And now that should just about do it for this here. So let's go ahead here and save this template. And now we know that we're going to see that template when we get this here, because remember we have return render template index.html. It looks inside the templates folder, finds that index.html, pass in this posts. Now in that index.html, we have the form for submitting new posts, which when you submit it, sends a new post request to this endpoint with that information, which is pulled off. A new post is created, and then, a new post is created, and then we have, we grab all the posts and return the template again. And then in that template, we go ahead and we loop over all those posts, displaying the name of the person who posted, the content of their post, and then we end that loop, and then we end that's the end of that template, okay? So now in order to get our server to run and have anything up and going here, we're gonna say if name equals main app.run, and we're gonna say debug equals true. Okay, so what this is doing is saying if this is the file that is running, so this if name equals main syntax is basically saying if this file is the actual file that was selected to run, then go ahead and execute this. Otherwise, if it's just a library, then don't execute that whatever is in that within that if statement block. Okay, so now we've got that app.run debug equals true. So let's go ahead here, and now we're going to see where the errors are, because I'm assuming there's errors. There are almost always errors. So let's go ahead here and see what we've got. So let's go ahead and activate our virtual environment that has our Python packages. So we're going to say source myenv bin activate. Virtual environment is activated. All right, so now we are referencing our packages that we specifically installed for this application. Now we're going to say pip install Flask cores. All right, so that will grab that. All right, so we've got Flask cores now. I don't think we need any other packages. I think those are the only two we used. Yep. Okay, so that looks good there. So now let's go ahead here and try running our server. So Python app.py, no module named Flask. All right, pip install Flask. Okay, so let's try again. Python app.py. Okay, so it looks like for some reason we are not referring to our virtual environment here when we try to install that package. Let's try again here. We'll say source myenv bin activate pip install Flask. Let's see here. Python app.py. Okay. Let's see here. So we're gonna try this out. We're gonna say source myenv bin activate, and then we're gonna say which pip. Okay. So it looks like we're using the 3.6. We're gonna say pip 3 install Flask. And then we're going to try Python 3 app.py. Okay, there we go. So now our server is up and running here. Let's go ahead and check that out. So we're going to go ahead and put in 127, let's like that, 127.0.0.1 at port 5000. Now we are seeing that specified right here. Oh, it looks like we have an error. Okay. So get post is not defined. Okay, so we need to import that from our models file here. So let's go ahead and say from models import create post get posts. Try again. Let me move myself out of the way. And let's see here. Invalid syntax. Import SQLite 3. It looks like we accidentally removed that I. Put that in there. Path is not defined. Okay, from OS import path. Try again. There we go. Okay, so now we are up and running here. So now let's go ahead here and check this out. Get post is not defined again here. So let's see what the error is. Get post is not defined. We have our function right here. We are importing it. Get posts. And then we are executing it there. Get myself out of the way here. See, is something not saved correctly? Def get post. Spelling is correct. Okay, guys, hang with me. We are going to figure this out. Okay, there we go. So it looks like something wasn't saved correctly. Now we have name SQL is not defined at sql.connect. Okay, I was wondering how I had. So we're going to say import SQLite 3 as SQL. I don't use SQLite very often, so that's my excuse for not knowing that syntax. Okay, so let's go ahead here and say Python 3 app.py. There we go. And now we can pull this up here. Another error. SQLite connection object has no attribute cursor. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. Cursor. That's what it should be. All right. We don't need that. Okay. Now we'll try again. Expect token end of print statement got post. Okay, so that is in our template. So we're getting very close here, guys. Let's go ahead to we need this other plus right here. Oh boy. Okay. There we go. And we try again. There we go. Okay, so now we have our screen here. Let's go ahead and put in an entry and see what happens. So I'm going to say name equals John. Post content is hello. Submit. And again, we have a typo in our models file. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right. And we try again. And there we go. So John says hello. Now we can go ahead and here and put John, goodbye. There we go. And our post shows up. So now we can go ahead and close this out, shut down our whole application here, and start it up again. And we will see those posts are still there because it is pulling from our database file. There we go. There are posts. There's our name, our content, and there we go. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions about this, please post them below. If you don't want me to do the debugging with you guys, let me know as well. I know that takes a little bit of time, but I thought that might be interesting to see. Generally, again, you just kind of move through everything slowly, look at the errors, take a look at your syntax, and work from there. Okay, so again, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please give me a thumbs up, would be great. Please do subscribe if you guys just got here. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great night.